guys, how's it going? Hope you're all having a really nice day. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I edit RAW files on the Fujifilm x100v. Before we start, I just want to say a really quick thank you to everyone who's subscribed to the channel. I just hit 1,000 subscribers. I can't believe that many people want to sit and watch me talk to a camera. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you, you're the best. Now, on to RAW files. So, when I first got the x100v, I just wanted to shoot JPEGs all the time. Anyone that's used the camera will tell you that the JPEGs that come out the camera are beautiful. There's so much you can do to customize them. However, as time goes on, I've realized that you can just get so much more out of editing the RAW files, and it really isn't that difficult. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I do it. I use a custom preset that I made, and then I put that on all of my photos, and then I edit on top of that. So I'm going to give away that preset, and then I'm going to show you what I do after applying the preset to them photos. That's pretty much it. I don't know what else to say, let's get right into it. Okay, so here we have some Fujifilm RAW files in Lightroom. Now, one of the major selling points about the Fujifilm cameras is obviously the film simulations that are built into the camera. However, not a lot of people know that you can actually access these on Lightroom by clicking Profile at the top, going on the drop-down menu, and they're in this camera section here. So you can go Camera, Classic Chrome, or you can go Camera, Classic Negative. Now, whenever I'm making a recipe for my Fujifilm camera, I prefer to use Classic Negative. I feel like it's the most filmic looking simulation. However, I feel like it's a bit desaturated, and you can only increase the saturation +4 on camera, which is, you know, it's an alright little boost, but it's not as saturated as I would like to make it, which is one of the main reasons why I like to edit my RAW files. I also like to do a couple of things with the tone curve and the HSL sliders, and also add in grain. So what I've done is I've made this preset called Eddie's Classic Neg Base, and what that does is basically just adds on all of the little tweaks that I would usually do to a photo just in a preset. So whenever I'm going to edit a photo, I would click Eddie's Classic Neg Base, and that will give me a really nice, easy starting point. So for anyone interested, this does a couple of things. Firstly, it will make your profile Classic Negative if you hadn't already shot in Classic Negative. Secondly, it will increase the vibrance and saturation of your image. It also affects your tone curve a little bit. So for example, in these bits of like the highlighted areas where usually your highlights would look a little bit blown out if you turn the tone curve off. When you add in the tone curve that I've made, it just darkens it down a little bit. It still keeps the highlights kind of really bright, but it just makes that grain show through a little bit more and gives it a more filmic look to your camera. I mean, I know film photos don't have grain in the highlights, but I think overall, when you're kind of looking at something on Instagram quite small, I feel like it just makes the whole image look a little bit better exposed. The next thing it does is it makes adjustments to your hue, saturation and luminance of the colours in your photos. Now, for anyone not aware, I'll very quickly run through what this does. This will take specific colours such as red, orange, yellow, etc., and it'll let you just edit just them colours. So for example, there's a lot of blue in this photo, so I will just show you on this one. If you turn the blue down, it will make the blues more turquoise. If you turn the blue hue up, it'll make it a bit more purple. Saturation just increases or decreases the saturation of that specific colour. And luminance increases the exposure of that specific colour. Obviously, if you take it to some extremes, it looks a little bit weird, like you can see where the cactus meets the sky here, so it's best used sparingly. Moving down to the bottom of these sections, we have a bit of grain, well, quite a lot of grain actually. I like my photos to be pretty grainy. You can easily dial this back if you don't like it. The other thing I do is I add in a very small amount of like negative vignette, whatever it's called, just to darken the edges down, draw your eyes to the middle of the photo. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this Classic Negative Base preset in the description. You can download that and then you can use it as a starting point for your photos too. So once I've added this base preset, I will then go on to tweak each individual photo. So in this photo, for example, I will maybe put like the blacks down a little bit, kind of get a bit more contrast in these darker areas. Might increase the highlights a bit more. The good thing with having this tone curve is that you can basically kind of increase your highlights all the way at the top, and it doesn't ever really look blown out. It's still, if you look at the histogram here, it keeps your highlights a little bit from the clipping point, so you can kind of mess around with that. I'm going to dial them back a little bit though, but I do kind of like the bright highlight look. I feel like it's just nice and sunny and, you know, bright. I will maybe reduce the clarity a little bit just to get a bit of a glow on the image. And I think with this image, I might just make the sky a little tiny bit brighter. What I like to do when I'm editing is I will periodically like zoom out of the image and just look at it kind of against this white background. I feel like it, I always use a white background for editing. I think that it just makes the image look a lot more like it's printed in a book. And I feel like that's the best way to view photos. So I will always keep on kind of zooming in and zooming out, looking at the photo smaller. It's nice to look at this little preview up here too. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that for the first image. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so here we have a pretty picturesque landscape. What we're going to do, we're going to put classic negative base on. It's very dark, so I'm going to increase the exposure of this shot quite a lot. I want to bring some of the detail back in the sky, so I'm going to put the highlights down a bit. And I actually think that this shot would be really nice if it was a bit warmer. So I'm going to increase the saturation to something about 6,500, something like that. I'm going to add a little bit of contrast, and I'm going to bring the black level down to just add a bit more contrast just in the shadows. Let's bring those shadows up a little tiny bit so we've got a bit more detail in those. Now, I really like this image. I really like the greens in the mountains, but I think that I like these orange tones coming through here. I wonder if we can get a lot more of them in this foreground. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go down to the HSL panel. I'm going to dial the yellows on the hue back quite a lot. There we go. So now we've got some pretty kind of autumnal looking colours in the grass here. Let's also take the blue down, so we've got some more blue in the sky. Maybe put that up a bit actually. And then let's boost the luminance of the grass. Okay, so, I mean, I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. Let's maybe make it a little bit more dreamy. So I'm going to take the dehaze down. So we get like a nice... I mean, dehaze is a great tool for removing haze from your image. But here, we don't really have any haze. But it's also really good for adding a bit of haze to your image. So, I mean, you can go at the extremes and it's pretty wild. But if you dial it back, like maybe to like 10, it just adds like a nice kind of atmosphere to your image. The only thing that it does do is it does take out like quite a bit of detail. So we're going to get the texture slider and we're going to put the texture slider up to around about 15, just bring some more detail back in that house there. And I'm maybe going to make it a little tiny bit warmer. Yeah, I would say that's around about done. If we compare that to the original, I feel like that's quite a huge improvement. And especially like the things we did with the HSL slider on this grass at the front here, you're not really going to be able to do that with any sort of JPEG from the Fuji files. So this is a great example of like putting the RAWs on the computer, you can get so much more out of them. Okay, so on to the next one. We have this shot from Hodge Close Quarry. So let's put the classic neg base preset on. Now straight away, it's a bit too cold, it's a bit too purple. So let's bring up the temperature. I really want to go for a really warm kind of summer's day, blazing heat wave type look for this photo. So let's get that temperature all the way up. And let's maybe bring the tint down just a little bit, just so we don't have that purple in these. See, it was about there. Kind of got this purple kind of tint in the shadows. Let's get rid of them. These highlighted areas are just too bright. So let's bring them down a bit. Let's add a bit of contrast, make it pop a little bit, and let's brighten the exposure up. Get that kind of really sunny day look. I don't know what I'm doing with my words, that really sunny day. You know what I'm saying though, don't you? That, like, let's get the sun popping. Increase the exposure. This a little bit more. Okay, so this is looking really good compared to what we had before. I maybe want to make it a little bit more glowy. I mean, I use a Pro Mist filter on all my photos, so we get that kind of nice glow anyway. But I definitely want to, I think I want to add a bit more glow. So I'm going to dial the clarity back a little bit, increase the texture just a little bit, just to kind of bring the sharpness back from taking away from the clarity. And yeah, I mean, I'm pretty happy with this. I don't really think there's anything else I would change. Maybe I might see what it's like if I add a bit more of a, if I add a bit more of a vignette to this image. It's not really going to do that much to the kind of main focal point of the image, which is this bright area here, but it's gonna get rid of kind of this brighter shadowy bit here. We've also got a bit of a blue tint down here. I think that's from like the there was like an opening to the cave on the other side behind me. If I'm being picky, what I would do is I would go on this masking tool again. I would get the brush, make the brush quite big, and then let's just paint this little area down here, just that little bit there, and let's increase the temperature. Yeah, I feel like that matches it a bit. And I'm also going to reduce the exposure of that too, darken that down. Just bring the viewer's eyes to the middle, to this little metal structure that's in the middle of this here. Okay, I think that is done. I would say that is quite a big improvement over the original. Here we've got some really bright kind of foliage. It looks kind of fake, to be honest with you. It was just really well kept. Let's put classic neg base on. Okay, so here it's give the overall photo a nice film look, but it's took too much of this green out here. So let's first off go and add some more saturation to the green, because I feel like that's like a nice focal point of the image, like these bright bushes, whatever they are. Let's increase the exposure. We'll decrease the highlights just to keep a bit of that dynamic range. Add a bit of contrast to make it pop. Maybe add a little bit of dehaze. It was dusty that day. Maybe add a bit of texture. And I think the tint is a little bit too green, so let's add a bit of tint. It's a bit too far, but let's maybe going to put it about there. Yeah, maybe going to leave it like that. I'm happy with that. Let's zoom out. Yeah. I mean, if I was being really picky, I would maybe straighten this building up. So what we can do is we can go to the transform section and click auto. What that's going to do, that's going to straighten up all of the lines in your image. I mean, it's not done it 100% here, but it's done it, pretty well. We can also use the transform sliders to adjust this. So, that's made the buildings a bit straighter now. However, it's also cut off a bit of our image at the bottom. So this is one of the negatives of having your background as white, is you don't always notice this. So let's put it to darker grey for a second. So yeah, you can see when it's like straightened the image up, it's stretched it and it's cut out a bit of the bottom there. What we're going to do, we're going to crop and just get rid of those corners. Let me move this box up a little bit. I'm not too sure I want the bottom of that bush in actually. Let's crop this a bit like that. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Let's have a look. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. On to the next one. Let's make that white again. Let's apply the classic neg base. Okay, cool. So, I really think a focal point of this shot is the Burj Khalifa in the background. So I'm going to increase the exposure and kind of make that stand out a little bit more. I'm going to add a bit of contrast, make the city lights pop. I'm going to maybe dehaze the lights a little bit, make it a bit glowy. And again, this building bothers me how the lines aren't straight. So let's go and apply that automatic transform upright again. And then let's make these oranges a bit brighter. I'm going to maybe straighten this up a little tiny bit just because the lines on that building weren't perfectly straight. Okay, that's cool. I'm happy with that. So this image, I was actually taking a photo of this dam and this guy just walked past on a horse. So I just kind of stayed there and just waited for him to pass me, took a load of photos. A bit of a strange composition. I don't know. I didn't expect the guy to walk past on a horse. Anyway, let's put on the classic neg base. Let's increase the exposure. Now this is way too purple. So what we're going to do, we're going to dial this exposure all the way back. I would say, I kind of want like a nice cold look with this image, I think. I'm going to dial back some of this purple. Let's make that a little bit warmer. Okay, so I mean, the white balance isn't technically right on that, but I don't know, maybe it is. That's how I like it. It's going to stay like that. So let's increase the exposure a little bit more. Let's boost the highlights a little bit. Reduce the black level, get a bit of contrast. Actually, let's take some of the contrast out. I kind of like the flat look with this. I think it's an improvement on the original. I probably wouldn't do much else to that. Okay, on to the next one. Right, so I included this image as I really don't think classic negative is good for portraits. I don't really think that the way that the tone curve of classic negative works is great for skin tones and stuff like that. But I really wanted to include it because I do think that it's still a really nice like filmic look. So what I'm going to do with this image is I'm going to try and play to the filmic look of it, and I'm going to make it look even more filmic. It doesn't even sound like a word anymore. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the classic neg base on. That has just made the reds way more saturated, which is not what I wanted to do. Let's increase exposure a little bit. Let's reduce the highlights to get the light coming through the trees. So what I'm going to do here is, because we've got some nice red tones, what I might do is go on this color grading section, and I'm going to move the color grading more to that's a green, that's not yellow, more to a green in the shadows, and boost the exposure of the shadows ever so slightly. And that is going to give your image a kind of a bit of a, you see if you take that on and off, it's going to give your images a bit more of a faded, low-mo, out-of-date film kind of look. I'm going to boost the exposure a little bit more, and I'm going to reduce the saturation a little bit. Okay, so while this wouldn't be my kind of choice if I was doing like a portrait shoot, and you were doing a portrait shoot with a model in a studio, I wouldn't use classic negative unless I was really going for like a film look. But in this instance, in the woods, I feel like this is quite nice. I feel like the greens go with the red of the tree bark, and the skin tones and the skin color isn't perfect right now. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to go on this hue section here. The skin tones range from kind of like an orangey yellow to like a red. So what I'm going to do, instead of just sliding each one individually, I'm going to use this little target tool. And what that does is you can click on a part of your image, and it will select the range of colours that you're working with. So if you look on the right here, it's adjusting the hue of both the red and the orange because it detects that there's a red and an orange. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it to one extreme, and I'm going to slowly move it up until it becomes what I think is the most pleasing natural skin tones. So I would say that's around about there. Maybe I want it a little bit more. There, maybe, I don't know. I would say that looks quite nice. I'm happy with that. I'm happy how that looks. The only thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to boost the saturation, the luminance of these greens, just because they look a bit kind of crushed and a bit weird. Okay, so let's boost that all the way up. Where are those greens? So this target thing is quite useful here, because to me that looks really green, whereas when you move the greens, it's not really moving the greens much. However, if you go on yellows, all of these kind of green sections are actually yellow. So that's where the target comes in handy, because if you put that over it and slide it up, as you can see, it is affecting the yellow. Let's move this up a little bit more, make that a bit brighter. Okay, overall, I'm happy with that. Especially for a portrait shot with classic negative, I'm happy with that. Okay, so here we have another portrait. There is no like foliage over the top of the model, so the lighting is quite nice and even. It's not really got a tint to it, so this should be a little bit easier to do. Let's put the classic neg base on. Okay, so yeah, I mean, skin tones straight away look a lot better. Again, I probably wouldn't use classic negative for a portrait, but I feel like if we boost the highlights a little bit here, a bit more contrast, a bit more exposure, and put the blacks down a little bit, maybe take out a little bit of contrast there. I wouldn't really do anything else to that. Okay, so last two. So we've got this image that I shot at Stades. Let's put the classic neg base on. Obviously, it's very cold. Let's brighten this up. And I would boost the exposure, bring down the highlights, maybe add a little bit more vibrance just to kind of make it look a little bit sunnier. And I will boost the blues in this image just so the blue sky looks a little bit nicer. Compare that to the original, I feel like that looks a lot better. Straight away, just a few quick adjustments and I think it looks great. And for the last one here, we have, I think these are people's houses. This was in UAE when I was there a couple of weeks ago. So in person, these colours were really bright. They were kind of like, looked a bit like this, but you know, your eyes have a much better dynamic range than the camera. Looked a bit like this, and it was really bright. It wasn't that bright, Jesus. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and get the colour in the sky looking exactly how it was, how I remember it. So first off, let's put the classic negative base on. We're going to bring down the highlights just to bring the sky a little bit darker. And we're going to, everything looks a little bit too purple, so we're going to move the tint across slightly. I'm going to boost the shadows up to get a bit of detail in these trees. I'm going to put the blacks down just to kind of get the contrast kind of popping after we've put the shadows up. And just for good measure, I'm going to add a little bit more contrast. Now, overall, I'm happy with this bottom part of the image. Actually, I'm going to make these palm trees a bit more green. So let's put the saturation of them up a little bit in the yellows. There we go. So this bottom part, like I said, is looking really good. I'm happy with that. However, the sky is just not how I remember it. So what we're going to do, we're going to go here, we're going to click on sky, and then Lightroom is going to detect the sky. We're going to reduce the exposure of it slightly, and we're going to boost the saturation, and then maybe give it like a little bit of a purple tint, because that was how I saw it. Now, I think the sky looks pretty good. It looks a little bit too blue at the top here, so we're going to boost the temperature. This is looking a lot better. But overall, it looks a little bit too HDR-y for my eyes, so I'm maybe going to put the exposure up. Actually, I'm going to put the exposure down a bit, and I'm going to boost the highlights. So that's going to keep some of the contrast in the clouds at the top. We can also, if we wanted to, reduce this black level, make it look a bit stormy. However, it is starting to look a little bit weird where these mountains are, so I'm just going to put that up. Quick zoom out on that to see what that's like. I don't know what I've done with the sky here, but I'm not really liking it that much. Let's increase the contrast and increase the exposure. Okay, so yeah, I'm happy with that. Overall, let's come off that mask. I think it's a little bit too warm. It's still a little bit too purple overall. Let's adjust that exposure, put the highlights down. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this. I would maybe work a bit more into this if I had more time, but for the sake of the video, I'm just going to cut it there. So yeah, I hope you've all learned something from this. Like I said, my classic neg base preset is in the description. Download that, have a mess around with it, and enjoy.